Hey there, welcome back to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. I'm the host of this little podcast that I've created, years ago now, and I'm looking forward to bringing you another episode. A little bit of housekeeping. Who am I? I'm a coach, and I work with men. Primarily, I help men transition and create change in their lives, whether that's in their work, at home, their wellness. We get really clear on where you are right now. Where do you want to be? What's that gap? And we start to build in the practices, the actions, the environments, the people, the support that's needed to live closer to your authentic best self. But first of all, we've got to get really clear on where you are today. And even if you're not using me, where are you today? Get as clear as you can on that. Where do you want to be? Right? Where's the growth? Where's the pain? Where's the challenges? Get as clear on that as you can. And then start to work on the process goals to get and move closer to that person. Whether that's something really small or something that's quite big, the clarity and the commitment's the key. And that's the work I guess I do as a coach. That's my big thing is awareness is not action. So you can have all the podcasts, you can have all the books, all the information and knowledge that you want in life, but if you do not take action on it, it does nothing for you. Every tool, everything you need to build a house, but if you do not take action to build the house, all that is material. It's nothing. The hammer doesn't do anything. It's a tool to build a house, but it's nothing if it doesn't get used. And this is the same for us. And every week I'm interested in the clients and the people that I work with in terms of you give them tools and practices and things to move them forward, and do they take action or not? Are they going to see change or not? If nothing changes, nothing changes. It's one of the most powerful mottos you can live by if you're not willing, because change will happen. We get to choose it or we get to respond to it, and sometimes we've got to do both. And that's the work that I love to do. So you can check me out at lukemclean.net. There's one-on-one coaching, there's dad's group coaching, there's meditation classes. And if you sign up to my weekly newsletter, you get my daily clarity and commitment planner, which is a really simple 5-minute practice to start the day with more intention. And that is almost the foundation for me, and especially for my clients, is to start with space. And that's what we do with the clarity and commitment planner. So that's me, and that's my bit of housekeeping. That's who I am, what I do. And if you want to work with me, I'd love to catch up for a free 20-minute discovery session and see if working together would be the right fit for both of us. So it's super cool. I love it. I'm passionate about my coaching. I'm passionate about my clients, and I'm really excited for the direction it's going. Now let's get into today's podcast, and today's a real thinker. It's a real sort of connecting to our thoughts, our beliefs, our stories. It's with a guy called James Pearson. James is a counselor. He's just written a book, The Book of Unfinished Feelings. It's about to come out. He said it's pretty much complete. And it's really a journey today of self-discovery and self-understanding. James was in IT, and then he moved into wedding videos, and now he's into counseling and working with people. And he's like, his life journey and zigzag has taken him to this place. And what he really understood was the power of our stories, our thoughts, and our beliefs have on who we are, which is right in my wheelhouse. This is the stuff that I love to do and talk about. And often we don't spend enough time sitting in this space of self-understanding and self-discovery and being curious and questioning where are we and how did we get here? What are the thoughts, beliefs, and stories that we've attached to and created that have formed us and shaped us into who we are? And are they still relevant for who we are? And that's what we're going to unpack a little bit today. We talk about fulfillment, contentment, and purpose, and living in the moment and the importance of that. I know that gets thrown around so often these days, but it's relevant. Don't let that just be something that passes you by, the importance of presence. So we're going to talk about all that kind of stuff today with James. It's a really deep dive into all we think we create, which is a really cool thing. That's his Instagram handle. You can check him out. I give him a follow. He's got really good quality content. It's interesting. It's intriguing. So James Pearson at All We Think We Create on Instagram. My Instagram's Luke McLean Life. My website's lukemclean.net. I hope you like this conversation. It was a real pleasure. James is all the way in England, so I'm super grateful for him doing a nighttime. I did an early morning. We met in the middle. Technology is a powerful thing, so we're able to do this. But enjoy the podcast. Take care. My name's Luke McLean, and this is Conscious Conversation. Really looking forward to the conversation and the Instagram account you've got and the work you do. And I'm actually really interested in the work, who you do it with. But it is quite unique work. And I'd really be interested if we could just rewind it back to where this began for you, like whether it began at home, in school, after. Could you just give us a bit of a brief snapshot of where it began?
Yeah, sure. It's actually kind of a long, winding tale, but I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. I started out life coming out of school, thinking, what am I going to do with my life? So confused, like so many people are at that age, and fell into computing, which obviously is really logic based. And I completed the degree, and the day after my degree, I remember I received a new modem, and I was hooking that up to get onto the internet, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to get this thing working. And it was a degree in computer networks, and I felt so just despondent about the whole thing. So days later, my brother kind of called up, and he was a wedding photographer at the time, and he said, James, do you want to film a wedding? I said, sure, that sounds like fun. So bought some gear, went off and shot a wedding with really no kind of preparation or experience behind me, just flying on a wing and a prayer. And I loved it because it kind of tapped into everything creative inside me. And that spawned a roughly 12 or 13 year career in the wedding industry. After which time, my wife and I were talking sort of family planning, and we thought we couldn't sustain this kind of being out every weekend, very demanding lifestyle. And so we broke off and we launched a wedding blog. And as far as I know, it was the first video blog of its kind, where we interviewed individual suppliers and we just sort of chatted weddings. And I don't think there's anything really like it out there at the time. Fast forward 3 years, lockdown hits. And obviously this grinds the wedding industry to a complete halt. There's nothing happening anywhere. And a lot of the wedding suppliers were really having a hard time. And one by one, slowly started to come to me just to chat, just to sort of ease the whatever it was that was going on. And I didn't really understand it at the time, but I later discovered that people gravitate naturally towards other people who are empathic. And I thought, well, I've never really considered myself empathic, but I looked into it some more and then decided to sort of capitalize on this almost happy accident and retrain as a counselor, because it was something that really, really fascinated and interested me. So I got myself onto a course in counseling, and that's where the fun began, because I found myself like a duck out of water, really. I was thrust back into a situation that I was incredibly uncomfortable with. The whole formal education thing really wasn't my favorite. But there I was, traveling miles away from home with loads and loads of social anxiety due to lockdown, all sorts of weirdness. And slowly but surely, the course started to kind of shock a lot of feelings and emotions out of me. And I was surprised at how emotionally challenging this whole situation was. I had no idea going in. I was really just exploring a route. And I think it kind of awakened something inside me. And I just thought, this is actually really what I want to do. I want to get out there and I want to be able to help people. And I want to understand as much of this entire field as I possibly can. So we had a really, really tempestuous time on the course, with course tutors kind of coming and going. It was really, really disruptive, but I thought ultimately amazing, because we had so many different perspectives. And the last tutor that we had gave us a task, and a lot of people will be familiar with the concept of masks, like the masks we wear in public and the masks we wear around certain people. And we had to draw a mask of things that we were hiding from the public eye, really. And I remember drawing mine with a blue and pink pen. sort of subconsciously, and then was talking to the class, and the tutor sort of honed in on the fact that I was drawing a lot about both kind of masculine and feminine energies. And I guess the blue and the pink kind of stems from my childhood, where these were the dominant colors to represent male and female at the time. I know the world has moved on and it's completely different today, but that was sort of stemming from my childhood and my experience. And he simply sort of just said, "You need to read The Red Book by Carl Jung."
Mm.
And I don't know whether you've had this in your life, Luke, where there just seems to be this massive thunderclap and something important has just happened. You sit bolt upright, all the hairs go up on your arms. And I was sat there thinking, yeah, okay, I'm going to read the Red Book. I don't know anything about it. Don't know who this Carl Jung is. Went home, checked it out on Kindle, because you cannot for the life of you buy a print copy. And when you find one, they're expensive. And this was the most expensive Kindle book I'd ever seen. It was like £25, which is, gosh, 50, 60 Australian
Yeah,
dollars,
for
maybe.
sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, I bought that and dug into it. And within a couple of pages, I was being connected with something beyond any kind of experience I'd ever had before. It was almost like the book was revealing the thoughts that I was having, kind of like in real time. And it was a very strange experience. And I don't know how it really happened, but I thought, I need to write. So I need to write something. There's something happening inside me that has to come out now. And through reading Carl Jung, I kind of learned about the different identities within inside us, and I zoned in on this idea that I'd lost sight of who I was over the decades. Like, years of experience had distorted who I truly was and who I was supposed to be. And so I wanted to get back in touch with this kind of authentic self on the inside and try to remove the layers and layers and layers of ego that had built up over the years. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, James today is like the product of what everybody else has wanted me to be, or I felt other people have wanted me to be, and just the entire identity of myself was confused. So I sort of came up with this kind of Jungian idea that if I tapped into the mindset of other people, I would be able to cut straight through to kind of like the identity inside, bypassing all of the meanness on the outside. So went out onto social media and decided to ask totally random strangers if they would share a single feeling word with me. And I remember at the time it was kind of a mix of terror and excitement, because I thought, either people are going to go for this, or it's going to be really difficult, or people are going to laugh at me or think I'm totally crazy, or anything could happen. And it felt very uncomfortable. But as I started the process, it just kind of blossomed into this kind of beautiful thing. And it was actually really easy. And people were only too happy to share something with me. So the words started flooding in, and I had no idea what to do with them. And then before too long, I found that by sort of bunching them together into groups of 10, I could create thoughts and sentences that said things. And these thoughts and sentences would be able to kind of mine a deeper part of my being that I would not be able to access without the thoughts of someone else. So it was almost like a self-therapy, if you like. Because I wouldn't have these thought patterns, and certainly not in this kind of way. And then the meditations then seemed so appropriate to kind of reflect on and write a book about.
Yep.
And from that process, then this whole connection between words, emotions, feelings, the whole thing has kind of exploded into just an absolute, well, it's a borderline obsession of mine, really. And I'm exploring every single aspect of it. Very, very inspired by psychology, philosophy, psychotherapy. I love the way this stuff can help people. And ultimately, if I can help people explore some of the process that I've used to help myself, then that would be, a fantastic endgame.
Yeah. Well, it's a deep dive, mate. Like, you think about, you've gone from computer IT to weddings to cancelling, or in some ways it sounds like a bit more like depth psychology, like really sort of getting into that
Sure, yeah.
understanding of what it is. And I'm interested, you know, for you in terms of, you know, when you go down sort of, you know, and did you want to give a quick snapshot first of to everyone who Carl Jung is, like Jungian psychology, and usually for a lot of people, who are what you call Jungians, it's a life's work. Like it's a
Hmm.
real deep dive down a lot of rabbit holes because he was a very unique thinker.
Prolific fella.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. So the brief history really is, and I don't confess to know all the details. Really, I'm still learning myself. But Carl Jung and Freud probably at the very foundation of psychology. That work in psychology, because before that there was really only psychiatry.
yep.
And so psychology was kind of born around that time. And Carl Jung was a man after my own heart. Really, he was a very deep thinker, very very self-reflective, an artist, fascinated with sort of history and human history, as well as having all those kind of the angle of psychology and psychiatry. And so he used a lot of symbolism in his work with clients because he believed that so much of kind of human experience can be represented or recorded in shapes and patterns. And when you get into it, it literally just, yeah, like you said, deep dives down a rabbit hole, and sometimes your head explodes from just the complexity of it. But
Mm,
I think the Red Book is probably his strangest work, because it reads like a descent into madness.
mm,
But it's fascinating what comes from that madness, and it's all self inflicted, which is incredible. Um, and then really sort of that sort of Carl Jung, and in a nutshell. And he had a falling out with Freud at one point because they disagreed about these identities, these different aspects of identity, and so they split off and did separate sort of forms of study. And then along came people like Carl Rogers, who more recently created counseling. So sort of
mm.
counseling was born out of this psychology, which is born out of psychiatry. um, and it's a fascinating kind of step through time to see how one influences the next. And I think a lot of these modern therapies that we're now discovering, and especially like the system that I've sort of developed and used on myself, is sort of more like a further evolution of all of these different things put together. And I love I love the fusion of less logic, funnily enough, and more kind of philosophy and emotion. I think a
Yeah.
lot of what
Okay.
we go through isn't logical; it's more emotional. And so, kind of removing a little bit of the science and then inserting a little bit of the art, I think that goes a long way to kind of help a lot of people in a lot of ways.
And in your understanding, James, I'm interested, like, and with the work that you've seen done, and through the work of Carl Rogers, like, how does it help? Like, what's the from all the philosophy, all the words, or what happens? How does that transform into action?
Nice. It's a good question. I have had so many people that I know say, "Oh, I tried counseling, but it doesn't work," or "I've tried hypnotherapy and it doesn't work," or "I've tried XYZ." I don't think there is a single modality that works for everybody. I
Mm,
really don't believe that. But I do believe that there are kind of focus areas where different types of people will respond positively to different types of things. And I think a lot of the work, especially that Carl Rogers did, was kind of turning psychology on its head and trying to make it less about diagnosing people and slapping the labels on,
yep.
and instead just taking that person at face value, getting
Yep.
alongside them, and kind of just joining them on a journey to try to understand where they are. And it was a really kind of dramatic shift in ideas at the time, because until then your psychologists were really sort of high level doctors and very very people would look up to them. People would
Mm,
be, maybe even slightly intimidated at times by them. But the counseling brought it down to the level where the client and the counselor are supposed to be at the same level,
yeah. Okay.
experiencing the same thing at the same time. And I think that was a beautiful shift,
Mm.
because for some people, that is exactly what they need.
Yeah. Yeah. And with all the words that you've had come in, like how many have you had, and what have you done with them? So sort of what's that looked like for you? What's that process?
Yeah, it was really funny because one of the things that I really, really dialed into from young was this idea of having too much intention can be the death of opportunity in life. Like if you're too focused on
Mm.
one single thing, you sail past everything else that's happening. So
Yeah.
I decided going in that I would negate all forms of intention and I would allow this thing just to find its own feet, create its own way, speak to me when it was ready to speak to me. So I decided to write a book, but I did not have any idea how big or how long this book was going to be. So people kept asking and asking, and I thought, well, I guess it's about 50 meditations. But just the other day on meditation 30, something just clicked, and this meditation was the entire journey of this project come full circle. And immediately at that moment, I realized that is where this book ends. So that's what's happened with the book, and it's just wrapping up now, so that should be out fairly soon. The book is called The Book of Unfinished Feelings, and the meditations continue. So I've had nearly 400 feeling words shared with me to date. And like I said, each meditation is created from 10. So we're banging on the door now of 40 meditations. And I've just found along the way that so many people have responded to the different ones in so many ways, and sometimes in such a kind of explosively emotional way. Like someone will pick one up and it is literally the experience they've just had that day or the day before, or and I love that kind of resonance. And there have also been so many doors and opportunities that have opened to me, like possibilities and potentials for things, just from being involved in this. It's
Mm.
completely rewritten my life, my idea of what's possible, and I'm just truly liberated by it. So that's the process in a nutshell.
When you say meditations, what do you mean in terms
Hmm.
of? I think that's an interesting, my understanding of meditation, because it's an interesting word where it's used in the Bible, it's used in yoga. It's quite a you know transcending word which
Hmm.
can be taken a lot of different ways. So I'm interested in how you're using it.
Cool. Okay. So meditation, in the sense that I set out to create something that would penetrate my thought process and go deeper than I was able to go myself. So these words, these sentences, these phrases, these collections of sentences, which are meditations, are designed to surpass my conscious thinking and go levels deeper down into my subconscious, to draw stuff out in a way that I would never, ever, ever have explored.
Mm.
So the meditation part of it is really a huge amount of self-reflection
Yeah.
and sitting with the words and living with it. So yeah, I think like you said, there are so many different sort of types and ways of meditation, and this is a way of using words to focus thought process and self-reflection in order to
Yeah,
find answers that you can't get yourself.
yeah, and it fits in with the context. Like I teach meditation, and it's really interesting where the history of it and the best way I like to, and because it fits in with, I think people get this perception of meditation sitting on a cushion and just
Right. Yeah,
focusing on one
absolutely.
thing, right? But in the history, like the context of meditation is to become familiar with. So that's like when in, if it's the Bible, Jesus went and meditated on God's word. It was to
Mm,
become familiar with God's word, and you've got these words that you've gone deeper than than you previously would have gone before, and you've cut through to
mm-hmm.
become familiar with, or to deepen and understand more.
Myself. Yeah,
Yeah, which is
absolutely.
interesting, which I quite like as how you're using it, which is awesome.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's good. Mate, I'm interested sort of in who this book's for. Like who's reading this book, and like what's the, because it's a very unique concept which I love, and I'm just interested in when you wrote it without too much intention, which you've said
Hmm.
before, which is I think is a really interesting thing. But did you have a vision of who this is for, who'd be reading it, or was it more I just wanted to put this out and see what happened?
Right, you've hit the nail on the head, really, Luke. Perhaps the first person to be dialed into that, actually. And yeah, it didn't have an audience. It never had an audience. It never had an intended audience. But honestly, upon reflection, and now that most of it's complete, I think the people that could get the most out of this are empaths, highly sensitive people, creative people, healers, spiritual healers, and definitely people who are experiencing or desiring a self-healing journey. So it's reflective. It's reflective people that want to figure something out about themselves. That's who the book's for, because that's who I was or am.
Yeah, nice, nice. Can we go back, because I wanted to, because I find this a fascinating subject to talk on, but this idea of when you realized how much of previous beliefs, what you've read, what you've consumed, formed who you are, and then because I've went through a similar thing of, you just understand that that's all conditioning,
Hmm.
that you think is you often, but it's not you, it's someone else's projection of you. And
Right.
then you get sort of lost of, well, then who I am, who am I? And understanding that something's conditioning you always. So whether
Mm-hmm.
it's you realize it, you read the red book, that's now conditioning you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm just interested in that process of how you went through that, because I think for a lot of people, when they realize that, it's quite confronting to think, oh, I thought I knew myself, but
Mm-hmm.
is that actually who I am?
Amazing question. Really, really good question. I have had to confront all aspects of my past
Mm,
through my counseling training. And a lot of it was truly shocking and alarming, scary, frightening, unsettling to piece back together in a new way. Because, like you said, everything that happens to you informs who you become. And then to try to undo that and reconstitute yourself is a horrific ordeal in the best of times. So unpacking a lot of it, really, I grew up in a very small village, a very small rural village, um, and you might say probably a fairly wealthy one. But my family were one of the families that had to sacrifice and struggle to get there. So we were on the fringe, and I think I grew up with a lot of pressure or the idea that life was a certain way,
yeah.
and I didn't understand the complexities of it. And that kind of combined with the fact that there was really nothing going on in our village. We had a tennis court,
Mm,
and that was it. And so you had to make your own way. You had to make your own play. You had to imagine. And so I think every day I was being challenged to go inside and get something out, because there was
yeah.
really nothing outside.
Yep.
I mean, truly beautiful countryside, like an idyllic place, really. And that sort of has maybe inspired a lot of the sort of artistic nature
Mm,
that want to sort of share that with people. But the damage came from this idea that uh, everybody around me was in some way kind of better or superior, and I felt very, very inferior after a
yeah.
time.
Okay.
And so I had to get away, and I actually came back to live where my dad grew up. Quite by accident, because we found out after the fact that this is exactly where he used to live. So we've kind of
Wow.
come back to the source. But I don't know if there's something genetic or inherited, but we came back to where my dad started. And and began to just kind of build my own thing, free of that part of society to which I would never be a part.
Mm.
And it took years to undo, decades to undo and understand that you've got to make your own place in the world. Like, you cannot compare yourself constantly to other people.
Mm.
And also, by doing that, you kind of miss all of the amazing stuff that really matters, like family and
Yep.
love and friendship and all those kinds of things. They are the true worth in life. And I think the shiny baubles, if you can afford them, that's great. But to sort of pine after them, or to feel that you need to have them in order to fit in, is probably a little bit toxic.
Yeah, it's well said. I think that's a really important part for people to realize, because you aren't those baubles, you aren't those things.
Right.
They're not you. And if you think that they are, the everything's impermanent. So when they go, you go, and that's where people tend to struggle, because they've attached so deeply to what's not them. I'm
I think the
interested
other
in.
the other side
Yep.
the other side of that, Luke, sorry, was that I think if somebody has more than you or appears to have more than you, then I think we see those things as baubles. The people who have them, that's probably just their normal. So it's like, it's context as well.
It is, and I do a lot of work with really wealthy people, and for them, a lot of it's authentic. Like, they want
Mm,
to create a business, to do something that on the outside, a lot of people wouldn't have the energy or want to do it and see it as
sure,
extreme.
yeah.
Is actually they're filling their cup, and they don't see it as extreme or whatever. But also, they're not. They've got the nice stuff, but they're not attached to it as that's who they are. That's just a product of them living authentically, and that's a different
Mm-hmm.
beast, as opposed to chasing it, wanting to go after the material, but on your inauthentic path to try and get it, because you think that
Yeah,
will
to
produce,
try to fit in, right.
yeah, or that'll
Mm,
produce the authenticity and the happiness. When it doesn't, you can
right,
go a
yeah.
long way off path trying to find something that's not yours to find. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think I think you're right. That's an interesting point. I'm interested for you, James. Like, how do you see the relationship between inner work, the stuff you do internally, and the outer work of, the outside world, relationships, people, and that influencing you, and how do those meet together to form unity?
Okay, that's a deep one. Uh, Something that I have discovered along my little personal journey is just how much people are dialed into themselves and kind of self-focused and inward facing. And I found that the more you move away from gazing inward to gazing outward, so for example, if you wake up in the morning and your first thoughts are like coffee, stress, problems, these are all going to manifest in a very inward sort of facing outlook. But then when you wake up in the morning and you say, my family, my opportunity, my vitality, my life, then you're gazing outwards. And I think the more that you apply that in your life and stop to think about other people and stop to get into other people's frames of reference, which is like a very counseling type attitude, the more you can get alongside other people, and instead of trying to force yourself onto them, try to hear where they are and try to see what they are and what they're about. It's such an exciting process because it opens up this experience of feeling and experiencing things that aren't your own,
Mm.
that might become your own in time. And I hope this is answering your question. And I've had so many different strange encounters where I've taken sort of the unsuspected path and made a decision based on other people, and the most amazing stuff has happened as a result. And recently, my wife and I take it in turns to pick my son up from nursery, And then every now and then we go into collecting together, and I always think, why are we doing that? Because it seems like a waste of time. Like one of us could be doing something at home that needs to be done, like cutting the grass or some cleaning or something. Why are we both going in? And it's because I value our family unity, and I would rather invest the time in being that family than chasing after all of the kind of like the problem jobs and the tasks and stuff. And on one occasion, I was just getting my son into the car and I heard someone yelling across the car park. And I was like, oh, gosh, what's going on there? First thought was like protection mode. It was like, this seems a bit scary. Get son in the car, get belt on, go, go, go. And then I could hear it getting closer and closer and closer, and it quite agitated. And I sort of turned around, and it was clear that this guy was coming towards me. And I thought, oh, okay. He came sort of really close, like maybe 3 or 4 foot. And he said, I just wanted to stop you. I was like, okay. He's like, to tell you that I really love your t-shirt. And in that moment, I just thought, wow. I thought, there's somebody who has gone completely out of their way to come up to me to give me a compliment.
Yeah.
With wanting nothing in return. And the sheer irony of that was that I had been meditating on that 2 days prior. And I was like, wow, if you are open to this stuff in your life, you're open to the experience, and you're taking those kind of less selfish paths and less selfish decisions, it opens up the floodgates to all of this kind of wild, fascinating, affirming stuff to happen in your life.
And does that, James, like when you're what you post on Instagram and you talk about, and I'm just interested in, the power of words and the power that our self-talk and the words, not just what I think we say to other people, but the words we say to ourselves, and how they can give energy and build, build us who we are, but they can also take and tear us down.
Right.
What's your sort of, from what you've done and the journey you've been on, what's been your relationship to that?
Yeah, I think again, it's kind of bringing that counseling perspective back into play, that we have language, and something that's always tickled me a lot is language barrier and mistranslation, and when words are used inappropriately, especially across countries. And I found it fascinating that our language kind of falls utterly short of expressing how we feel, especially. We don't really have the vocabulary to describe any of our experience. And so when we describe something to somebody, they get their version of what we're telling them. They can only imagine or process the version that their brain has experienced. Yeah. So the transference of ideas and thoughts amongst people is a bit like Chinese whispers, in the sense that the emotional meaning or the emotional context can become completely, disrupted or distorted as it passes between people. So there is power in words to sort of obfuscate a lot of what we're trying to express, especially in art. And funnily enough, one of the things I really love about Carl Jung is how conservative he can be in his use of words, and the power that he can deliver concepts with so few words. And one of my favorite quotes, which I shared recently, was live, the unavoidable decides. And that's 4 words. And those 4 words have bailed me out, since discovering that quote, have bailed me out of so many kind of self-sabotaging mental traps. Because things go wrong in everybody's life. And if we can just kind of interrupt that whatever's going on and say, well, we were never really in control anyway. Like, this was going to happen this way, like it or not. Just carry on living. Now is not the time to stop. Now is the time to carry on living. And I love the power that such simplicity can deliver. But I'm also fascinated to explore how confusing and complex like language is, which is why I've gone back to the words that were shared with me, and I'm now sharing them with everyone on social media and seeing what they manifest from encountering those words, and the range of it is extreme, from like super positive to super negative, just from a single word. And it just goes to show that you can't have a single word to describe feelings. It's too difficult to get to the true meaning through the use of words. So there has to be some form of deeper connection.
Well, yeah, and I'm wondering whether we're getting that in modern life, because the idea that I always think back to whether to Young or whoever, there was a simpler way to live.
Mm-hmm.
So we're consumed constantly, we're constantly busy, we're constantly reacting, and our cup's constantly full because we want to fill it to feel purposeful and relative. Because if we don't,
Right.
someone we feel like we're going to miss out. Whereas back when a lot of this stuff was written, there was a slower pace with more depth.
Mm.
Mile wide, inch deep is how we live. More back then, it was more an inch wide, mile deep, and
Yeah.
just interested in the reality of how that plays out today.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting one. I'm very lucky and fortunate to have my grandfather still with us. He is 105,
Mm,
so he's seen out an entire century, and you can imagine the change that has taken place in his lifetime. At the same time, he still emails me on his iPad.
mm,
He has managed to keep up with the development of the world, and I think, in fact, I was just reflecting on this earlier today, on a meditation, and it was this idea that life changes constantly for everybody, and whilst sometimes it can feel incredibly negative, it's really, really important to remember that in everything and anything that happens, there is opportunity. And I think you're right that our attentions are becoming really kind of shallow, and we're so busy across so many different things. And I forget how many advertisements we now see a day, but it's in the thousands or something. And our brains are becoming just bombarded with all this information. And I remember, I was laughing about it the other day. I remember when encyclopedias were on CD-ROM.
mm,
Uh, yeah, it's hard to imagine. Prior to that, you'd go to the library. So everything is speeding up into seconds rather than used to be hours, and it used to be
mm,
days and maybe weeks. So the world is speeding up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to become more disconnected. And I think projects such as mine that I'm doing right now are global and literally would not have been possible
mm.
without the tools that also are causing the distraction and the all of these problems. So I just think it's the same as anything, that time moves on, people do get left behind, the next generation picks up the pieces, and they create a new world. And I think that's
Mm,
just been an ongoing process. I remember my grandfather telling me that his dad thought that rock and roll music would destroy the speakers.
mm,
My parents used to believe that sitting too close to the TV gave you square eyes. It was
mm,
all of these kinds of myths that come along and go. We're right to be fearful of it, I think, because then that keeps us humble. But at the same time, I just think it's necessary to capitalize on the potential,
mm.
in society, and the ways that we are now connected.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think everything's got a relationship to it. Whether it's our thoughts, our words, our devices. It's our relationship to it. And I think the awareness of what it gives us at the end of the
Hmm.
day, and what do we want? And I guess that's a really good introduction to the question. Like, what is with all the work you've done, what is a life well lived?
Right. That is a very, very on point question, because it is definitely one of the things I wanted the book to find
Mm,
for me. And I think originally my idea was that the ultimate goal is happiness.
mm,
And I believe that came from my grandfather, who constantly reinforced this idea of seek happiness, be happy. He lived a very, very complicated, complex, but simple life, and always had time for the simple pleasures, and family came first.
Yeah.
Um, and so happiness was his message really to me. And through this process, I've kind of discovered and had it agreed upon by quite a number of people that contentment is more
Mm.
powerful than happiness, because happiness can grow from contentment.
Mm.
So I think the ultimate state, my conclusion is the ultimate state is contentment. And it really does speak to my experience in that challenge to try to compete or to catch up, or because I have found such a wealth of contentment in the most simple of things. Like, the most important time is family time, and I absolutely live for it. And really, it's kind of now in such sharp focus that everything else is very much a secondary objective.
Mm.
And the most important thing is just a contentment within myself and my family.
So if we dig into that a little bit, James, I'm wondering for you, especially the journey you've been on, is what have been the environments, people, actions, thoughts that allow you to frequent contentment? Because contentment, again, I think is incredible. It's also impermanent. It's not
Mm-hmm.
going to stay. You're not going to
Fully agree.
today
Yep.
feel completely content forever.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll visit it more often if we can. But I'm wondering what gets you there, but also maybe what moves you away from it.
Right. Yes. Something else. It's amazingly something that I've reflected on deeply. This idea that contentment is the ultimate goal, but is completely transient. It's
Mm.
uh, it's something that shifts over time as we change, as we grow. What contentment means to me today is not what contentment would have meant 10 years ago. We're in a totally different place. Um, so I guess a lot of contentment is surrounding authentic purpose and fulfilling whatever it is in the soul that needs to be fulfilled. And that is going to be so different for everybody, almost indescribable. And for me, I am most content with myself when I'm creating. Like, if I'm in a creative flow, I am very content. And then that contentment spills out into other areas. At the same time, even now, I think before going on this journey, I would have succumbed to stress, depression, anxiety, self doubt, imposter syndrome. I'd have done all of that stuff in droves. And although the shadows of those feelings are still there, I think nowadays I am so filled with a sense of contentment to have my family that I really don't need anything else. So they're parallel. I find contentment within myself through my creative endeavors, and that satisfies my drive, I guess. And then contentment within my family, which satisfies my need for validation, and I guess like life purpose, really, to achieve something incredibly valuable on this earth,
Mm.
is to love my family and be present and spend time with them and create memories.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So I
nice.
guess to the other side of your question, like what drives us away, is that all-encompassing, suffocating need. Like the passion that spills over into obsession. Um, that you start to work on something and you're fulfilled, but then like perfectionism kicks in, and you're driven to work all night or something, and then you're tired the next day, and then what fueled you kind of destroys you. And so it's a really, really gentle, a really fragile existence, really, to kind of find that balance.
Yeah, I think yeah, like it's like you sort of said before, like discontentment can stem from a lot of different areas, but comparison and
Mm,
judgment are going to fuel that
absolutely,
pretty
yeah.
heavily because it's never enough. Um, but for I think it's interesting. Like it's like for me, because I agree. I think contentment's a really big thing. I think acceptance is huge that leads to contentment. Like when we've got pure
Mm-hmm.
acceptance of what is, we can feel content with what is.
Yeah.
Because I look at it, I've got 5 kids, but they're going to grow up, or if something happened to one of those, or if I lost my family,
Mm-hmm.
but my whole attachment to contentment's based on time with my family, that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm discontent.
Yeah.
But if I can build pure acceptance to what is and find that, which might be difficult, that's going to allow me the door to contentment in whatever I'm pursuing or whatever environment I'm in.
Right. Yeah.
So, sort of like family's there for me, but it's the acceptance of what is within the family and the pure joy of it that leads to that. But accepting that they're going to get older, they're going to leave, and that won't be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to, because you see a lot of parents or mums, parents especially, trying to hold on to the family as it is and
Right.
keep
Yeah.
it
There's the
as
big shift that comes, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and the attachment to identity as being a mum or a dad when
Absolutely.
you
Right.
no longer need to be a mum or a dad, you need to be something
Now
else
what?
that is a mum or a dad, but not in
Yeah.
that way, not in
Yeah.
that form. So I think that's really interesting that you sort of say that. And I always get play around with it. I don't know the difference, to be honest. I think sometimes it's funny where it's like contentment or fulfillment,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like I think that they just sort of sit together. Like
Exist in the same space, don't they?
yeah,
Yeah.
the sense of fulfillment is a what life well will what you've done has been fulfilling, whether that could be of service, of
Mm.
whatever it is. But I feel like they sort of just piggyback off each other, because when we're doing something fulfilling, you're going to feel more content. When you're content, it's probably because something's been fulfilling,
Right.
um, and we find that. So I think that's just an interesting point.
Maybe
So
fulfillment is the contentment that comes from like intention. Like maybe fulfillment is more
mm,
intentional.
yeah, and if we can, I think exactly what you're saying before. If we can find fulfillment and contentment in the little things in life, in the simplest things like picking your kids up,
Mm.
if that fills your bucket,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
really feel content, that's huge. I think people are trying to find it sometimes in more or the new clothes or whatever, and thinking
Right.
that's going to
Mm-hmm.
provide it, where that's expensive and spends a lot of energy. But when that morning coffee, but you drink it not to get through the day, you drink it to purely enjoy the taste experience of the coffee. That's a different
Different ball
relationship.
game.
Again, that's a different
Mm.
relationship to the coffee, because you're like
Mm.
exactly what you're saying. If you're getting up just to use it to get through and not even tasting the coffee or enjoying it,
It's
or
a
you sit there on the
negative.
deck, take it in, it's that relationship piece. So I think that's really cool. So with the book and with your work, like what happens next, James? Like you publish the book, are you cancelling at the moment as well, or what's that looking like?
So counseling studies continues,
Yep,
and I'm just building out, really testing the waters in a sort of a new form of word therapy,
yep.
which I believe bridges the gap between basically what counseling would provide, but for people who are already very, very self aware. Like if you've done a great deal of self healing and self reflection, I believe that you, in most cases, may not necessarily benefit from some of the professional mental health services out there because
Mm,
they're geared up to really untangle very complicated emotional states and trauma. If you're someone like me and you're just sort of a creative flame that burns in all these different ways, you can encounter all kinds of very complicated emotional problems, which I believe are best served by somebody else who has been or is embroiled in them.
mm.
And so it's really a massaging of the two kinds of things together. And I'm just seeing how that's going. And the responses at the moment are really, really strong. And I think we're having quite a lot of breakthroughs. So it's just a question of continue down the path and see what comes from it, really.
Yeah, that's nice. Is that for you, James? Is that like someone? Because I think it's it's pretty cool. But like canceling, or someone's got problem, they're pretty unaware, they need help to fix that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, is it what you're sort of saying? Someone's really quite self-aware, who's on the journey, who maybe is not even broken
Mm-hmm.
badly, but feels the need to maintain and sustain through a form of therapy or self-work to prevent and be proactive as opposed to reactive. Is that a little bit more of what you're sort of looking at as well, or is yours more to
Yeah,
think
yeah,
again?
you've got it. You've got it in a nutshell. I think if you think life coach, but then come away from that straight away, it's sort of more a life coach isn't a mental health professional, right? So
Mm,
they're providing a service that enables people to kind of tap into themselves. Um, and that's what we're looking at here, because I think the self-talk is very limited. And that's why I set out to get inspiration from other people, because I wanted something bigger than what I could provide myself.
mm,
And so I think the whole talk therapy from counseling is such a powerful tool in enabling people to hear what they're saying as it's reflected back to them from somebody
yeah,
else.
for
And
sure.
also that concept of acceptance. Like sometimes when you're creative, you're pulling something new from the ether, whatever it is, painting, music, writing. Nobody has done this before. You are the first. And you're pulling it from a place of almost madness, because you're not repeating what exists, you're creating something completely different. And that comes from like a voice inside your head.
Mm,
It's so close to like a psychosis, like a positive psychosis.
yeah, and I get that. Like I coach people, I coach men, but it's so powerful when you get someone who you get them to articulate the problem or what they want,
Mm-hmm.
and you actually get them to write it down or to say it in a fluid sentence, as opposed to trying to, they've had that thought or problem in their head for so long they've never actually articulated it in words.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when they get that on paper, it's like, wow, that's,
Wow.
even that in itself is either it's not that bad, or actually already
Mm-hmm.
know what to do with this pretty much. Now it's out of my head and here. Um, so yeah, the words, yeah, they're super powerful if you can get them out and understand them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and just that acceptance, that somebody else agreeing with you that what you feel is correct. Somebody else just saying, "Yeah, that's correct for you." There's nothing
yeah,
weird about that.
no.
Massive affirmation.
So from this conversation, if we're going to summarize it, what have we taken from it? What do you think, James?
Oh, wow, what a lot of ground. Yeah, we've dug deep. I guess in summary, then, I think there's a lot of new and exciting stuff coming along for people to try in like a therapy coach
Mm,
guide kind of way. And I love the fact that people slowly are becoming more open to it.
mm,
Not so much here in the UK. I don't know what it's like over where you are, but I see kind of America, Europe.
yeah,
Um, they're way ahead of us in terms of like accepting this as normal behavior. And the closer we can get to just accepting that this is a good thing to do, the more we can normalize it, I think the more people can be helped by it.
yeah. I think you're right, and I think the gateway to that's that self awareness and self understanding. Like it's, I think that's the bit which is the blocker, especially in Australia, especially with men who I work with, is the want to do a bit of deep work to understand who you are, at your core,
Hmm.
not, and trying to get that door open, because it's hard to get acceptance if you don't know what you're trying to accept.
Right.
So if the form of acceptance you want is not going into actually who you are, like that's for me is the bit, especially again with men in Australia, it's very hard to break that. But I think you're right. Once you get there, and we've spoken about this today, we've spoken about like that. Once you understand yourself and understand the words and build a better relationship and a healthier relationship and know what's getting conditioned into you, but that's okay. Again, accepting it and then not trying to fight it and understand the ego a bit more, then the modalities that are coming in become really useful. I think,
yeah.
and even the modalities to help people open that door up are really helpful to move forward. So I think and I think what the work you're doing on words and thoughts and some of that Jungian stuff that can get articulated in a much simpler way, because the thing with the Jungian work, which is incredible, is for a lot of people they'll never read it or understand it.
Yeah, it's tough to wade through, yeah, for sure.
But if someone like yourself can get it in a way that's palatable for someone, for an everyday man or woman to take and use in some form, then there's a bit of gold in that.
Yeah. I'd not seen it that way before, but I mean, thanks for that. Yeah, that's a cool nod.
No, I think it's and that was part of the reason to get you on. Like it's huge work, but I think it could be so much more powerful for more people if they can use it practically, because things like the Red Book or James, even traditional wisdom, but articulated in a simpler version for more people. I think there's something in that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Mate, awesome to have you on.
Well, it's been a super pleasure. Thank you, Luke, for the invite.
I look forward to the book and giving it a bit of a listen or a read and seeing what comes from it.